From the Atlantic's battered harbors to the steel-gray rim of the Great Lakes, almost half the nation calls just a slender edge home. The continent's heartland lies largely empty, a great quiet between the coasts. These thin strips shape an economy so vast, their output would rank as a world power. Rust and steel, endless plains, and roaring engines all report to the margin, not the center. But what force keeps millions clustered on the margins of a nation built for expansion? What history, what geography, what single bold project made living on the edge more sensible than settling the interior? The answer is hidden in rivers and railroads, in ports and pipelines, and in one audacious engineering gamble that set the pattern forever. The continent stretches wider than any eye can follow, but settlement has always hugged the edges, drawn to the places where water meets land. Along the Atlantic, deep harbors cut into rocky coastlines, offering ships a safe haven from storms and ice. Rivers like the Hudson and the Delaware run deep and steady, carving green valleys through fertile soil, their currents carrying goods and people far inland. In the north, the Great Lakes form an inland sea, their shores lined with natural harbors, their waters rarely frozen, even in the heart of winter. These are not just pretty landscapes, they are natural highways, carved long before the first surveyor's line. The land beyond these edges tells a different story. The heartland rises and falls in endless waves of prairie, broken by rivers that run shallow or twist into sandbars and swamps. 2,000 miles of continent stretch between the Atlantic and the far Pacific, each mile adding friction to every wagon, every bale of cotton, every barrel of wheat. In the west, mountains rear up in jagged walls, snowbound half the year, their passes treacherous and few. The interior is vast, but its riches are locked behind distance, every journey measured in weeks, every mistake punished by the elements. Climate draws another line. The eastern seaboard and Great Lakes enjoy long growing seasons, gentle rains, and soils that feed millions. The Gulf Coast basks in warmth and humidity, nurturing cotton and rice. California's coastal valleys, shielded by mountains and caressed by Pacific fog, yield fruit and grain as if by magic. But step away from the water, and the land grows harsher. Plains turn arid, summers scorch, winters bite deep. The farther from the coast, the more unpredictable the harvest, the more uncertain the journey to market. All along these watery margins, nature laid out a blueprint for prosperity. Ice-free ports, deep channels, and fertile valleys made it easier to gather, build, and trade. The edges became magnets, drawing people and ambition into narrow ribbons of settlement. Here, every advantage stacked up. Ships could dock year-round, crops could move quickly, and the world's markets felt just a little bit closer. Before any canal was dug or steel rail laid, the logic of the land set the pattern, thin strips of life pressed against the continent's vast and silent heart. Scene: men with picks and shovels, sweat and mud, dynamite flashes against limestone. In the early 19th century, men with picks and shovels carved a new line across the wilds of upstate New York. It was called the Erie Canal, and it was more than a ditch, it was an act of will. Stone, sweat, and water came together, and a continent began to bend to human ambition. Diaries from Irish and German laborers speak of fever, of mud, and of blasting through living rock. At Lockport, crews opened a ladder of 5 locks, cutting through solid limestone where the land rose sharp above the plain. Each lock became a gate, each new town a sudden spark. Lockport itself rose from nothing to a bustling hub, its streets filling with newcomers chasing wages and promise. Map animation showing how a thin ribbon of water pulled people and goods. The canal laid down a pattern that would not be easily undone. Historian William Cronin calls this path dependence. Once a corridor is chosen, once stone is set and water flows, settlement and trade become locked to that course. The Erie Canal fixed the geography of prosperity, and the ripple lasted generations. Towns like Syracuse and Rochester, once mere dots on surveyors' maps, swelled with people and industry. The United States Census tells the story plainly. Canal counties doubled their population within a decade, as if the floodgates had opened not just for water, but for an entire society on the move. Political choices hardened those lines. The battle for the canal's western end was fierce. Buffalo deepened its creek to win the terminus, beating a rival called Black Rock. That decision set Buffalo on a path from a sleepy outpost of 200 settlers to a city of 18,000 in just 20 years. Engineers and surveyors, by plotting the course and setting the locks, drew the future with every stone. The canal became a living blueprint, a groove in the land that channeled migration, commerce, and hope. Nighttime aerial, highways and rail lights tracing the old waterway like veins. The Erie Canal's legacy is visible even now. Upstate New York, villages and cities still cluster along that old route. Modern highways and rail lines, even the glow of nighttime lights, follow the same corridor. What began as a muddy trench, cut by hand and muscle, became the spine of a region and a nation, locking generations to a path first traced in limestone and water. Steel rails cut across the continent like fresh scars, binding coasts and heartland in a lattice of ambition. Rust and iron catch the light, and the sound of rails is the sound of movement and promise. In the spring of 1869, at Promontory Summit, Utah, a golden spike joined east and west. The first transcontinental railroad was not just a feat of engineering, it was a magnet, pulling people and capital into narrow corridors of possibility. Cheyenne, Wyoming, barely a name on a map, swelled from prairie grass to a city of 6,000 almost overnight. Land agents and speculators flooded the railheads, snapping up plots as soon as the ties were laid. Railroad companies, flush with federal land grants, parceled out millions of acres along the tracks, offering cheap lots to settlers, but locking prosperity to the iron spine. Factories chased these new arteries, smokestacks rising where rails met rivers and lakes. The census of 1900 tells the story in stark numbers. The urban population leapt from 6% at the century's start to nearly half by 1920. Cities like Chicago, Cleveland, and Detroit mushroomed into industrial giants. Their growth funneled along the old canal and new rail corridors. Immigrants poured in, drawn by the promise of steady wages and the thrum of machinery. Neighborhoods grew dense and lively, stitched together by trolley lines and the clang of streetcars. Then came the oil. Coastal towns from Texas to California erupted with derricks and refineries, fortunes built on black gold. Houston, once a sleepy bayou port, became an energy capital almost overnight. Its ship channel deepened to handle tankers and the endless flow of crude. Refineries clustered close to water, where rail and ships could carry their output to the world. The boom stacked new layers onto the old corridors, steel, oil, and labor, all channeled into ever thinner bands of prosperity. Each wave, rail, factory, oil, compounded the pull of these strips, leaving the vast interior ever more silent, its riches bypassed for the promise of speed and scale. What happens next, when the ribbons of industry and transport that built modern America meet new challenges of automation, climate, and shifting trade? Will the American dream remain anchored to these thin strips of land, or will it spread again across the plains? The answer will shape the country for decades to come. Steel mills once thundered along the Great Lakes, the air full of rust and roaring engines, the water rimmed with piers and smoke. Archive footage, black and white, molten steel pouring, cranes moving like giant metal skeletons. But it was war that truly redrew the American map, and the story begins in a room stacked with maps and ledgers. In 1942, the War Production Board gathered in Washington, poring over those maps, and their decision was blunt and practical: build where ships could launch fast and where supplies could pour in by rail. Build near water and build near rails, they decided. The West Coast and the Great Lakes became the arsenal, docks and rail yards swelling with workers and purpose. Shipyards in Richmond, California and Newport News, Virginia won contracts worth billions of dollars, and whole cities changed overnight. Los Angeles swelled by nearly half in just 5 years, its streets filling with newcomers, women with rivet guns, migrants from Oklahoma, black families from the South, all drawn by the promise of paychecks and victory. Montage, faces in factory light, rivet guns sparking, ships launching, trains backing into yards. When the war ended, the highways came. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 offered a new kind of power: 41,000 miles of interstate, a concrete web laid over the old corridors. Lobbyists for automakers and oil companies pressed for routes that hugged the coasts and cut through the suburbs, bypassing much of the rural heartland. Senate hearings in the Capitol echoed with arguments about where the money should flow. The result was a nation stitched together, but with the thickest threads running along the edges. The Bureau of Economic Analysis now counts more than $10 trillion in output from these coastal strips. If the coasts formed their own country, their economy would rank third in the world. Animated map showing coastal population and economic density, bright lines along the edges. Alan Berube calls it the American paradox. The same thin ribbons that drive the economy now carry the greatest risks. NOAA maps show that nearly a quarter of those who live near the water face rising seas and stronger storms. A coastal planner in New York warns of crowded ports and flooding streets, of infrastructure already straining under the weight of growth. Meanwhile, in Kansas, a farmer stands by a shuttered school, one of 18 closed in his county since the 70s. He remembers when a dozen families worked every square mile. Now the wind rattles empty grain elevators, and the plains feel spoken for by silence. Slow pull back, empty highway, wind moving through corroded metal. A distant grain elevator creaks. The highways brought speed, and they brought scale, but they also brought silence for those left behind. What does the future hold for the American dream, when so much of it runs in thin strips along the edges, racing ahead while the heartland watches? End frame. Aerial shot moving from endless plains to neon coastline, the question hanging in the air. Imagine standing on a narrow strip of asphalt and glass, with the ocean on one side and an endless skyline on the other, and realizing that almost the entire nation lives like this. Today, 80% of Americans still cluster along these narrow corridors, leaving the nation's vast interior quieter than ever. Coasts. Wide aerial of a ribbon of cities hugging the shoreline. Why does this matter, and why did it happen here, rather than out in the open plains or the mountain valleys? The answer begins with the lay of the land. Rivers that run like arteries, natural harbors carved by glaciers and tides, temperate climates that favor year-round agriculture, and routes that connect inland farms to ocean markets. These are the geographic gifts that drew the first settlements and then the first highways and railroads. Ports. Map animation showing rivers, rail lines, and coastal population density. The turning point came when technology met scale. In the 19th century, iron rails stitched the coasts to the interior. In World War II, factories, shipyards, and aircraft plants concentrated where labor, capital, and ports already existed. Then, in 1956, the Interstate Highway Act rewired the country again, making long-distance commuting and suburban sprawl practical for millions. Turning point. Black and white footage of factories, then highways under construction. The boom that followed is hard to overstate. Coastal megaregions grew into engines of innovation and trade. Financial centers, ports, tech hubs, and manufacturing belts multiplied. The combined economic output of these corridors rivals entire nations, and their markets pull resources, talent, and investment toward the edges of the map. Scale. Montage of ports with cranes, rusted steel mills, gleaming data centers, and crowded commuter trains. But there is a cost. Concentration leaves the interior sparsely served, with shuttered towns and lonely infrastructure. It creates extreme inequality in housing, where coastal demand pushes prices sky high, and it concentrates climate risks where sea level rise, hurricanes, and storm surge can do the most damage. Infrastructure. Slow shots of abandoned main streets, then rushing storm surge against a coastal barrier. The future asks new questions. Can policy, investment, and a sense of national purpose rebalance opportunity across a vast continent? Or will climate change, polarized politics, and entrenched economic forces deepen the coastal concentration even further? Future. Animated comparison of population change over decades, moving inland only slightly. What kind of country will we become if we accept living mostly in thin strips, and what might we regain if we choose to build differently across the interior? American Dream. Join the conversation below.